Dan Rubenstein, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, thank you. How are you doing?
Where's your green? I
right
see
here.
no
Look,
green over there.
If you're watching it, look at the screen, Ty. I'm wearing a green shirt underneath this. Listen, I've been in the midst of setting leprechaun traps with a kindergartner, Ty. I can't forget St. Patty's Day. That's a thing around here. Like, we went over to a friend's house yesterday and they had a very intricate leprechaun trap with Lucky Charms in the box and some sort of closing mechanism to trap the leprechaun who was going to sneak into the house overnight. So, Ty, and I know you're a Notre Dame person, so obviously
I'm wearing the shirt.
A certain amount of sensitivity for all things fighting Irish, but we don't forget in this house.
What is your bait that you're using for your trap?
We put in something like cookie crumbs. It was a pizza box with a hole cut out, a toilet paper tube with netting on the bottom with a little bit of cookie crumbles down there. So the leprechaun would smell the cookies and then become trapped in the net and smell the delicious. It was a used pizza box. So smell the pizza leftovers, not leftovers, but the aroma of that pizza and be seduced into jumping into that toilet paper tube.
I have so many questions about this. Why don't we save those for the end of the episode?
That's fine.
That's
cool
with you.
I don't have that many more answers beyond what I just issued.
No, well, hey, welcome back to Chicago.
Yeah.
Last I saw you, we were both in New York. It was good to see you, among others. Welcome back into the Verballerhood, one and all. Thank you for coming on back here. On today's episode, we're going to do a little bit of a diagnosis, which, Dan, you can talk through in just a minute what the purpose of this episode is. I actually love this idea. I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
Thank you.
So let's talk through what that means in just a moment. Of course, if you are new here, even if you're not, hit follow, hit subscribe so that you don't miss any of our off-season episodes right now. 2 week for the foreseeable future. Still got a ways to go before we get to the season, but hopefully this episode can, we can collectively take a step back and take a look at some things we think need to change going into the 25 calendar season. Of course, Verballers.com is our Patreon where you can go for the ad-free episodes and the bonus content, the Discord access. And if you want to play in the college football dynasty we got going, you can play out there. Just Verballers.com, check it out. Or you can always send us an email at solidverbal@gmail.com if you have questions.
Yes, absolutely. So here's the thought with this game, exercise, whatever. Spring practice is underway. You're going to get the normal quotes from Marcus Freeman, from Scott Frost, from Matt Rule, from Justin Wilcox, whoever, where it's just like, it's good to get back out on the field, right? It's good to see pads hitting. It's good to see what the young players are doing in terms of good habits and trying to shine on a field full of veterans. It's fun to see the transfers come in and see, how they can contribute. And, it's all about just, getting better with the fundamentals, Ty.
Rapport. Building a good rapport,
exactly.
That type of thing. Yeah.
Right. That the fall success begins in the winter workouts in the spring, right? That like beach bodies start on Jan 1, that there is that line of thinking where it's just like, okay, let's take a look at what we are, what we're not, and how we can get a few inches closer every day. And I appreciate that. I subscribe to that theory that nothing happens overnight. And so we are taking a look at a number of teams who had glaring issues that needed attention.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, if you are a team who was catastrophically bad at everything, you need to work on everything. If you are a team who couldn't stop the run, couldn't rush the passer, couldn't protect the passer, committed too many penalties on both sides of the ball, lost all of your interesting skill talent, and it's not clear who's replacing them, there's never any one thing for teams like that. There's a lot that needs correcting. But I think what we did, and we didn't do this together, we're coming together right now to do this, is select a number of teams who had something glaring that stood out that sort of kept them between what they were and perhaps what their goals were. Something that prevented wins in close losses or in a number of close losses, or something that they tried to address last season and it obviously didn't work out. And we are going to say, here was something that stood out. Here is what they're trying to do to address that right now. And here's what we think they can realistically do to address that. Does that ring true to your ears?
I think so. And to your point, like, we're not going to do Florida State.
No.
on this.
No, I didn't take that route.
Florida State had a lot wrong with it last year, and this is not an episode so much to pile on, though there will be a little bit of tongue-in-cheekness going on here, I'm sure. But we're not here to pile on anyone, but I specifically tried to zero in on the teams that had one glaring weakness, one spot of deep red on the spreadsheet.
Yes.
That needs an explanation or at a minimum needs to be fixed. So I pulled out a bunch of those. I know you did as well. This was your idea, so why don't you start? Give me your first diagnosis here in the springtime.
Can't lift arm or speak at normal rate.
I like that. What is that from?
That's from the
Simpsons thing?
That's from the softball episode.
Of The Simpsons?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm going to start with a team that is sort of a sexy top 15 type pick. And I always like using the word sexy because you could also say borderline erotic with Brett Bielema and the Illinois Fighting Illini.
Oh.
Illinois was a fascinating team last year. They did a lot right. They improved upon a lot of things. They sort of went counter to Brett Bielema's reputation, even if it's an unfair reputation of just playing sort of smashy man ball, because at Arkansas, they threw the ball a lot with him. And now at Illinois, the best of what Illinois did last season probably came from the back half of the defense and the passing game on offense. Luke Altmaier's ascension to, upper tier, upper half of the Big Ten in terms of quarterback play, and Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin out wide. But really, what was interesting about Illinois was they kind of left some meat on the bone. Now, they weren't as good as Penn State. They weren't as good as Oregon. They probably had a decent shot to beat Minnesota at home. But if you're going to nitpick Illinois in a very specific way that, like, what can they fix given what's coming back, given what's not coming back, it's kind of the beefy stuff. It's kind of their rush defense. It's kind of their offensive line play. It's kind of slow starts, slow finishes in terms of Minnesota. The thing that stood out to me about Illinois, a team that did so many things either really well or decently well, is they were horrible on third down. Illinois was very, very bad on third down, and they went after defensive linemen, kind of all from Wisconsin. three dudes up front that played or in one case injured for Wisconsin last year, who was showing a lot of promise. I think it's James Thompson. Illinois has an opportunity, given what they do return on both sides of the ball, if they're able to figure out high quality defensive line play. And so that is havoc plays up front, that is putting pressure on the quarterback, especially on third down, as mentioned, that is forcing quarterbacks into faster decisions than they'd like. Illinois has an opportunity to be actually special. And it was the inability to just get off the field, force more mistakes. Excuse me. I'm just very emotional about this, or I have a sore throat. Force more mistakes from this Illinois defensive line that, you saw Oregon go up something like 35-3 at halftime. Whatever. A defensive line probably wasn't going to make a huge difference in that game. But with keeping the score close against Penn State, or close-ish, and obviously not really being able to get to Darius Taylor that much in that Minnesota loss, if there were an uptick in defensive line play this year for the Illini, it becomes real interesting. They don't play, I don't believe, a ton of obviously great offenses and quarterbacks this season.
Now, I'm looking at their schedule right now.
Yeah.
And I got to say, we talked about it a little bit, especially in the immediate aftermath of the national championship, when everybody starts putting together their way too early top 25s, way too early playoff brackets. You've seen those. I was taken aback a little bit by how high some people had Illinois in those rankings. But then you look at the schedule and it totally computes, because with what I am looking at here, they've got a game towards the end of September on the road at Indiana. Don't know what version of Indiana we're going to get in the Big Ten. The following week, it's back home against USC. Again, early part of the season for USC. I don't know what to expect from USC. I think they'll be better, but year to year with USC has become a bit of an inexact science trying to figure out which direction things head. They have Ohio State at home. That'll be a tough one. That'll probably be a loss middle of October, but the rest of the way, They go to Washington. I guess Washington will be improved. They go to Wisconsin. That's a tough place to play, but you and I both have a lot to say about Wisconsin and where that program's headed. There's not a lot of ammo on here that really frightens me. So to the point, I totally get where people are coming from by virtue of the fact that Illinois has been building for a bit now under Bielema, and the schedule seems to set up pretty well for them.
Yes, absolutely. And look, if they're somewhere, I don't know why I said literally, it's not literally, but if they're somewhere within a standard deviation of where they were last season in terms of quality on the field and production on the field, if you are adding in a defense that gets off the field a little bit more often, like they're the 70th best third down defense instead of they were like in the hundreds this year in terms of third down defense, what that does for your offensive line's fitness, for your running game, for Luke Altmaier, perhaps looking at more worn down defenses that are on the field a little bit longer. And, you know, the best of what they were on the ground was kind of fun last year with Josh McCray, etc. That I think that would go such a long way if these new guys and the guys that are returning on this defensive line and defensive front are just playmakers.
No.
If you could categorize them as a group that sometimes has playmakers. Last season, their defensive line havoc rate, reading stats is not fun to do out loud, 134th.
Not great.
In terms of run stuffs and tipped passes and sacks and tackles for a loss, like those types of big headline plays for defensive linemen. And their linebackers were good, and sometimes it's hard to quantify who's a defensive end and who's an outside linebacker and how that plays into those numbers. But they were dead last in terms of plays made, especially in those big third down moments. So I don't know if Illinois can take like a noticeable step forward there in terms of defensive beef. That becomes real fun.
Illinois, per Bill Connolly's post on returning production, third nationally. With what they have coming back.
Makes sense.
76% of their production returns, 5th on offense, 8th on defense. There's a lot coming back with the schedule that I think sets up pretty well. So we'll see if they can get that sorted out. You know what my favorite random Illinois, I guess, factoid is?
Is it just Pat Bryant scoring a touchdown against Rutgers with nobody guarding?
No. This is this is a broader sort
I
of
know.
Trivial Pursuit style question about Illinois within the Big Ten.
I'm ready.
If you line up all the Big Ten teams in alphabetical order, Illinois is actually the first team in the Big Ten.
Yeah, that is true.
Which is a
Not
crazy nugget, but go and look. It's 100% true.
Well, and it didn't get better with the expansion with what? 2 U's, an O, and a W. Yeah. Okay. I like that. Where do you want to go?
Since we teased a bit with Wisconsin,
okay,
I want to talk a little bit about Wisconsin's ED.
Oh, no.
ED.
Go on.
They have a big explosion deficiency up in Madison, Dan.
Yeah.
And there are a bunch of ways that you can measure that. There's not one tried and true number for measuring how explosive a team is. You can go yards per play. You can go plays over 20 yards. Bill Connolly, the aforementioned mastermind for all things college football statistics, he measures something called, I think, marginal explosiveness, which is really just removing garbage time and stuff like that. It doesn't matter which stat you want to use. Whatever works for you, stick with that. The only thing that all of the stats agree on is that Wisconsin was among the 5 worst teams in terms of explosion last year.
Right.
They were just really, really bad.
Lost their quarterback early. The starting quarterback.
Lost their starting quarterback. It wasn't as bad on the ground as it was through the air, where they just weren't throwing downfield at all. I looked, it was 116th in air yards per target, and they were something like 95th nationally in just catching contested passes. All of these measures that we have for, is the offense getting chunk plays? Why isn't the offense getting chunk plays? You can point to 1,000 different reasons on the Wisconsin side, but it's a real problem. And I think it's part of the reason why whenever you hear us talk about Wisconsin here, obviously this is the very early part of the preseason now. That's the source of the skepticism. That's the source of the skepticism. Now, you could probably speak a little bit more to the point of whether some of the changes Luke Fickell has made or is attempting to make will have a better effect on this offense as a whole. But you
Right.
cannot look at this Wisconsin team now in mid-March and point a finger, at least in my eyes, at anything other than the lack of explosion, because it really just sort of capped their offense. They couldn't do much because they could not move the ball, at least provide that threat of moving the ball in big chunks, and teams knew about it.
Right. And it's weirdly something that binds together every sport when it's obvious that you can't do something. What that does in terms of changing the other team's game plan, if you can't hit deep balls on a baseball field, the outfield comes in. If you can't hit 3-pointers, the defense comes in and packs the key. And so when you play Wisconsin and you know Braden Locke is not, and the offense, it's not just on him, but he was backup quarterback, that receivers aren't getting open often, that the offensive line isn't opening up huge lanes, you don't need to run an air raid to be an explosive offense. Or you don't need to have a first-round quarterback to run an explosive offense. You can run an efficient offense. There needs to be a threat of something. There needs to be, Noah Fant and TJ Hawkinson as tight ends in an otherwise not super explosive offense that's sort of built on ball control, or this old Stanford tight ends when they were running the ball down people's throats. There needs to be something that at least has the threat of being bad for a defense. And I think that's to your point, that there wasn't even an idea of what Wisconsin could do to generate bigger plays. And as I'm sure you're going to note, or is implied with everything you've already said, you have to play fully mistake-free, hyper-efficient 4 yards at a time football to win with that type of offense, which is kind of borderline impossible in college football.
Well, it's hard to do, especially in a tough conference like the Big Ten.
Right.
It just is. Now, they have changed their offensive staff now. They're going to go with Jeff Grimes as the new offensive coordinator. Who knows if that is going to lift this offense in any kind of significant way. Given the personnel, the Phil Longo thing always kind of felt weird to me. Like, it didn't seem like we were, I don't know, looking at a compatible situation up there. And obviously it hasn't really done a whole lot of good. So we'll see if going in a different direction is enough to fix the issue. If we're talking about it in March, they know about it already up in Madison. This is not, I'm sure, any great surprise to Luke Fickell, but I think that's got to be job one for Jeff Grimes, does it not? I mean, just finding some way to add a little bit more variability to the offense would probably go a long way.
Yeah, well, they've been spenders in the portal space. Obviously, it's what Billy Edwards coming in from Maryland is going to be the guy who seems to have a higher ceiling than where their offense has been. But yeah, I think the idea that they were going to open things up, as well as Phil Longo and North Carolina ran the ball when he was there, in a more wide open, balanced offense, which certainly seemed to be the goal for Wisconsin when they hired him, that personnel wise, there wasn't a ton of, and health has played a role, but star power at running back. I mean, Braylon Allen, awesome, of course, but behind him and whatever his strengths were, maybe didn't fully align all the time with what Phil Longo was trying to do a couple years ago. And then the guys recently, and in particular last season, I think were fine, but as a collective, in terms of play calling, offensive linemen, the threat of receivers and tight ends consistently, the threat of a quarterback going downfield. I just remember the end of that Oregon game, which was the Wisconsin game I watched closer than any, where Wisconsin had opportunities to drive down the field and win the game, tie the game, whatever. And there was never, I don't think if an Oregon fan were watching that game, they would say like, oh yeah, that was real scary near the end. It's like, no, they were just being overwhelmed by the Oregon defense and didn't really have an opportunity to show anything.
No.
So that was the issue with Wisconsin. I mean, in terms of like, are you optimistic that they can address that this year?
I was optimistic about the Luke Fickell hire.
Yeah.
But that optimism has waned a little bit, honestly.
Right.
And I know they weren't helped by injuries and the TVD things. Yeah, that sucked. There's just no way around that. I have tempered optimism.
Right.
I think at best.
Billy Edwards, again, this is not all on him, but last year at Maryland had the 123rd most explosive passing offense in America.
I've seen flashes from Billy Edwards here and there.
Okay.
He obviously needs to do a lot more of it, but I don't hate that signing.
Okay.
I don't hate it. I want to talk now about Colorado, if we could.
Let's talk Colorado.
So here is the general sort of quandary that I think Colorado finds itself in. And this is what I sent to you on Slack before we hit record here. We didn't really compare too many of our notes, but this is one that I sent to you because I'm genuinely curious about this. Colorado's leading rusher from a year ago ran for 373 yards and 4 touchdowns. They basically put it all on Shedeur and Travis Hunter. And a really good receiving core. They had really good receivers. The offense as a whole, I think, was pretty good. The line got better. Like there were definite steps forward for Colorado, right? This is not me dumping on Colorado at all.
The offensive line still wasn't it wasn't good last year, but it wasn't catastrophically bad. It was more normal.
Exactly. It was better than it was the year before.
Yes.
Undeniably. The problem that I have this year, obviously Shedeur is gone, Travis Hunter is gone. They went out and they got Caden Salter from Liberty, presumably to come in and be their starter. Now, I know they've also gotten some blue chip talent via high school recruiting that could play a factor at some point. But my assumption is right now, mid-March, that it's going to be Caden Salter. Caden Salter is not Shedeur Sanders. You're not going to give him the rock and tell him to throw it 45 times a game and expect him to win through the air. Caden Salter is fundamentally a different kind of quarterback. He ran for nearly 700 yards a year ago. He's just much more of a read option type of quarterback. Doesn't mean he can't throw. Doesn't mean he won't throw. I'm sure he will throw it more in that offense. But the real conundrum I find at this point, as I'm looking at these rosters, is are they going to change the whole thing up now after not running basically an entire season? Are they now going to switch up to a format that's better for Caden Salter, or are they going to try to make him Shedeur Sanders?
Well, I think here's the underlying question, too, is Colorado coaches are not dumb. Now, you can make the argument that, like, oh, they wanted to really showcase Shedeur Sanders. It's the coach's son, whatever, and they knew they had a huge talent in him, obviously a huge talent in Travis Hunter. But it's a question of, like, did they know this offensive line wasn't good enough to pave the way consistently for even an average run game? If not, why beat your head against a brick wall when you can throw the ball more successfully than you can even hope to run the ball? So why run for the sake of running to prove to very handsome podcasters like Dan and Ty that you can run when in fact you're not built to run? So if you're not built to run and your running numbers indicate that you don't care about running the ball that much and you do have a breakthrough season, it almost feels like the right decision was made for the talent on hand. But also, if you can't run long term, what does that mean for your program in short yardage? What does that mean for your program in the red zone? And they were a good red zone team last year, but can you keep getting away with not having that option in high leverage moments? I think your implication there is correct.
Yeah, I mean, their offensive coordinator is Pat Shurmur. Pat Shurmur's an NFL guy.
Yeah.
He runs NFL systems. That's kind of his go by. I find it very hard to believe they're going to change the whole offense up now that they've got a different style quarterback, and I don't know if he necessarily fits what they're trying to do. I could be wrong, right? I mean, Colorado proved a lot of people wrong this past season. They had a good year, and good on Dion for that, and for sticking around. I'm curious to see what this next chapter looks like, but that personnel decision to me feels a little bit off, and I'm genuinely curious to see if that's something that they fix. It was a huge deficiency. We talked about it all throughout the course of the year. To your point, it didn't necessarily come back to bite them that much because they just committed to Shedeur and getting the job done through the air. But I do think now if they're going to go in this Caden Salter direction for any period of time, that's a thing that they need to fix. And I have not seen great steps in the direction of trying to fix it. So we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah. So obviously the offensive line will look a little bit new last year, but there are a bunch of dudes returning on both sides of the ball. It's also a matter of Colorado should be good enough to be up for sometimes with 3.5 minutes left.
Yeah.
You kind of have to be able to at least run the ball. You got to figure out ways to possess in those moments that if they're still struggling to run the ball and keep running quality running backs around Dylan Edwards, obviously back to Kansas State before last season, then it's a pretty sizable question about what Colorado's ceiling is and what it should be if they are able to build out a more formidable rushing attack.
We'll see. I mean, they've got it's not just Caden Salter. right? It's 4 other guys on this offense. They've got a receiver, they've got 2 linemen, and they've got a tight end that they're bringing in. All these guys are coming over via transfers. They're not the only transfers on the roster on offense. I mean, Colorado now kind of has established itself as a team that's going to go out and work the portal, and they've done a pretty good job of that, all things considered. But I'm very, very skittish on this decision to go Caden Salter.
I totally agree. I'm going to stay in the Big 12, if I may.
Okay, please.
Kansas State's fascinating to me because if you look at way too early evaluations of the Big 12, Kansas State is at or near the top because of what they return, especially in the backfield. Dylan Edwards, Avery Johnson. They had winnable games last year, or they had games in which, all things being equal, could have been a win, if not for turnovers. Kansas State, interceptions, fumbles, letting games get out of hand, that BYU game, winnable games like Farmageddon with, I think it was 2 short field touchdowns for Iowa State off of fumbles. Turnovers can be random. You can fumble it and recover a fumble, as we know. You can fumble it and lose a fumble, as we know. And there's bad luck with interceptions, a perfect pass that gets tipped, or a receiver runs the wrong route and it's not on the quarterback because that was where the ball should have been thrown. But Avery Johnson still was undisciplined as a first-year starting quarterback for Kansas State. Now, sort of offensive coordinator change, and that Matt Wells fully assumes, but he's been there, fully assumes the role of offensive coordinator. We'll see. I assume right now, in terms of mental reps, in terms of tape, in terms of getting his first post-starter spring, Avery Johnson's going to be better this year. Now, I don't think they have a deep roster of star power at receivers, but getting Jace Brown back as like the clear number 1, losing a couple guys to the portal, bringing in a couple guys into the portal, I feel like Kansas State's always going to figure out offensive line. It's sort of just discipline. It's ball security, and it's understanding where defenses are, how to read a defense pre-snap, having communication, and working with receivers in the summer, in the spring, whatever, that everybody's on the same page. Because I believe the best of Avery Johnson to be an all Big 12 caliber quarterback.
Yeah.
And so Kansas State it was a nice win late against Kansas in a back and forth game. Kansas State just took themselves out of opportunities too often. Now, some of that was on the defense, gave up way too many big plays. They were a bad tackling team uncharacteristically last season. But even with that, there were opportunities to close out games, win games. And they won a couple close ones, like the Colorado one was very impressive, going to Boulder and winning that game. I don't know. As soon as I see a quarterback throwing double-digit picks, I think to myself, hard to imagine that there's a bigger issue right now with this team. And so I really don't doubt Kansas State's ceiling because Avery Johnson offers so much. I think there's so many more positives to say about him than negatives. But to me, it's just a discipline, turnover, randomness that it's going to come with age and experience, which, lucky for Avery Johnson, we're all getting older and more experienced every minute, Ty.
Father Time waits for no man.
So that's what I have for Kansas State, that there are so many interesting pieces on both sides of the ball, promising pieces. Obviously, they've always been sort of active in the portal, that if receivers are there, and we know at least one is, and we know running back is there in Dylan Edwards, DJ Giddens, for all of the greatness that he was last year. I think he went for over 1,300 yards. Can't drop the ball. Can't get the ball stripped. And that was a difference maker in Kansas State's season last year, that lucky for them, turnovers can be random, and there's no clear indication that, if you're turnover prone one year, that you will be the next year. So I feel good about Kansas State's ability to bounce back. It's a weird but kind of nice schedule too for Kansas State.
Yeah, I was just looking at it. They of course have the Farmageddon game, which they open up week 0 in Ireland.
In Ireland, yeah.
Which is very strange, but nonetheless, it seems like it is spaced out pretty well. It doesn't seem like there are any true gauntlets on the schedule that concern me. And again, we keep bringing this up whenever we talk about the Big 12, but like, stability is currency.
Oh, yeah.
In this era of college football, and certainly in the Big 12, stability is currency. There are a bunch of teams in this conference I have no idea what to expect.
You're absolutely right. And by the way, Just in terms of like let's accept this program as having a year in, year out good defense, how many are on there?
Not many.
Like Iowa State, I don't know if I fully believe it with Army. I haven't looked at their roster this season yet. Arizona, UCF, Baylor, TCU, Kansas, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State. I mean, Colorado and Utah. Utah had a good defense, all things considered. Colorado's defense, vastly improved. But there's a lot out there for 35 to 42 point performances.
Oh, completely.
So
completely. A lot of quarterback questions.
Yeah, I'm just saying strictly in terms of defense, just playing mistake-free, semi-explosive football should get Kansas State to 8-9 wins again.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Let me actually stick with that point of turnovers because you're talking about Kansas State. Let's talk about Arkansas. Arkansas was in sort of similar position. If you're comparing Avery Johnson, we could compare him to Taylor Green.
Sure.
And Arkansas had a pretty interesting case of fumbleitis / throw-a-tosa. I don't know. I'm making this up. But their turnover margin on the year was -8. Per Bill's numbers, they were actually a little bit lucky.
How about
they
throw negative for Taylor Green's blood type?
Throw negative? That sounds about right.
Okay. I mean,
sounds
he was
about right.
The best of him was so good, though. But yeah.
Talk about highs and lows, man.
Yeah.
Bill says they were actually a little bit lucky in the turnover department. And even still, they were among the worst in college football. There were a couple close games, as Arkansas fans I'm sure know well. I think it was, 3 losses by 1 score? Like, whenever you are having turnover issues, clearly it's close games like that where it can show its ugly face. Taylor Green threw 9 picks on the year. He fumbled 8 times.
Oh.
Now, he only lost 4 of them.
But
still,
yeah,
if you're painting a picture, it is not unreasonable to say that there are some ball security issues there.
Yes.
With Taylor Green, maybe trying to do a little too much, maybe trying to make a play. To your point, like, the best of Taylor Green's awesome. He's a big dude.
Mm-hmm.
He's a big dude. He can run. He can throw. He's got a lot of physical tools that I think make him a really, really interesting prospect, but he needs to hone the game. He can't turn the ball over. Can't fumble it 8 times. Right? Work on those drills where they're running through the gauntlet and everybody's slapping at the ball or something. I don't know. But they got to find some way for this coming season to make him a little bit more responsible with the football. Otherwise, Arkansas is going to find itself in perhaps an equally frustrating situation because if you're Arkansas, the schedule never eases up. They got Notre Dame this year as well. Like, it's going to be a tough road, as you would expect for an SEC West team or former SEC West team. Taylor Green has potential to buoy this whole thing, but he's got to get better at not turning the football over.
Yeah, I mean, it's really what are you leaving on the table? Where's the meat on the bone? And you look at the Mizzou game. Mizzou had 2 touchdown drives under, I think it was 40 yards or fewer. The Oklahoma State game was obviously winnable. The Texas A&M game was obviously winnable. And it's easy to say this one play cost them the game, but it's the typical undisciplined style of any team that shows you short field touchdown, special teams touchdown. Yeah. Those types of mistakes on the margins are killer. They're absolutely killer. Whatever you give Mizzou, a team that was struggling with defenses this season, obviously they weren't a hugely explosive passing offense like we thought they were going to be. You give them short fields, you give them opportunities, you get your own defense worn down because of those turnovers. I mean, it's not unfair to say Arkansas absolutely left 3 winnable games on the table this year.
100%. Let me go back to the Big 12 here for a second.
Please.
I'll talk about Texas Tech. So I think we're going to be talking a lot about Texas Tech this year. Texas Tech had last season what I referred to here as a severe case of slipnosis.
By the way, I have an alt for, because you said fumbleitis.
Yeah.
Throzempic.
Perfect.
Throzempic, obviously throws ending up in a loss.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Slipnosis for Texas Tech.
Okay.
And this is because they were a horrible tackling team.
Yeah.
Horrible tackling team. And it just affects everything. It affects everything. 133rd nationally in tackle success rate. Again, I don't know how they compute these things. I trust the people that do. That's a bad number.
Yeah.
And it kind of leads to other deficiencies, right? 113th in havoc rate. So they're not good at stopping plays or creating plays with their defense. It's basically
But they made a
useless.
change. They made a change.
They did make a change. It did make a change. And I think if I'm trying to put a positive spin on this, that's where I go next. A ton of returning production. They're first nationally in returning production on defense. They bring back 82% of their production from a year ago. Again, to the point, is that good because the defense was bad? I don't know.
Well, they bring a new coordinator in.
But they're bringing in Shieldwood.
Right.
They bring in Shieldwood. He comes over from Houston. Shieldwood has been with 7 different teams over the last 8 years.
Like a Jim Chaney coordinator consultant. Okay.
There's a little bit of Jim Chaney hired gunness going on there with Shieldwood, but guy's only 42. He's, I think, widely assumed to be kind of an up and comer in the defensive coordination world, in the coaching world in college football. To get Houston last season to be a top 50 defense amid all of the coaching changes and roster turnover.
And no offense. There was no offense for Houston. Yeah.
No offense to speak of. That was a decent enough defense. He did a good job. He had come over with Willie Fritz from Tulane the year prior. And like I said, there were a bunch of stops before that, but he did a good job. I am curious to see, and I think this will be a really, really interesting test case for, can a coordinator lead to more discipline right away?
Right.
We will know, because it really can't get much worse for Texas Tech. They were undisciplined. They didn't tackle well. Let's see what Shieldwood can do coming over, and if his system is a better fit. And if it can take hold quickly, it's going to need to take hold quickly. I think Texas Tech, among many other offseason storylines on the Tech front, is serious about trying to build something. They have been spenders. They're absolutely spenders. They are trying as best they can to try and turn this into something this coming year. I think they like their coach, but I think they know across the board that it needs to get better. They need to raise that benchmark. So, Shieldwood, I think that's how they try to fix the tackling and the havoc rates and stuff like that. Again, it does not need to be a top 10 caliber defense. It just needs to be marginally better, because the offense I still think will be pretty good.
Well, here's the important thing too. Texas Tech spent on defense in the portal.
Yes.
That Texas Tech, in their priorities, seem to be in the defensive backfield and defensive line. And so the easiest way to get better at defense is to bring in better players. So yes, you're right to point out the returning production overall, but that they're bringing in highly thought of defensive transfers at both corner and along the defensive line, and a new coordinator. The best case scenario is the Texas Tech defense is now a mystery, that nobody has a really good concept with Shieldwood, right? The defensive coordinator.
Correct.
What he's going to do with these players, how these players are going to fit in with the existing and returning players, and that Texas Tech, in adding some of the firepower that they did on offense, especially along the offensive line, that if the offense is playing better, then maybe teams are, all of a sudden down double digits and playing, sloppy football to try to claw back into games, which can force mistakes. Like, there's a good amount of complementary positivity that should be ingested about Texas Tech. That's barely English. I understand that. But no, that's why hopes are high, that they've been aggressive in terms of making coaching changes, making personnel changes, and I don't have the numbers here. I assume they were like one of the absolute worst teams in terms of allowing explosive plays.
Yeah. I mean,
Texas Tech.
It was all pretty bad.
That the quickest way to allow fewer better tacklers, better pass rushers, better coverage guys. And that's what it seems like Texas Tech has done. So in terms of like looking at all of these teams that we've mentioned so far, it almost seems like Texas Tech has done the most correctable thing.
Well, I think so. And it at a minimum, it seems as if they're serious about trying to make the whole thing better.
Yeah.
So if you're one of the many Tech fans who are hanging out on Texas Tech message boards, talk about the solid verbal. Thank you for that, by the way.
Obviously.
Read all these message boards. I know you're out there. We appreciate all the links you posted about our show. When we were talking about Texas Tech this past season, I would welcome Tech fans to weigh in and let us know your thoughts on some of these offseason moves, because there've been a lot. And I think, again, as a fan of a team, all you really care about. You want there to be wins for sure, because that's the name of the game. But
Right.
you also want to know that the administration, that the people running the thing are serious about trying to get better. Because I would lose count if I tried to name all the schools that you can't say that for. Texas Tech is, I think, in a good spot. Texas Tech, I think, is committed to trying to get better. I'm just curious to hear from people if you think it's going to work.
I mean, I saw that one of their major boosters sold his oil and gas company for $4.4 billion.
That helps. That does help.
That's a really nice starting point.
Yeah.
Should also mention my fun fact. You mentioned some of the fun facts that you enjoyed about last season, or like Illinois being the highest alphabetical school in the Big Ten. Texas Tech beat both teams in the Big 12 championship game last year. So their starting point is at their ceiling and at optimal health, they can beat the best of the conference and not make the conference championship game themselves.
Tech was one of the most fascinating teams a year ago.
Yeah.
And there were so many statistical anomalies on this sheet that we use every week that you have a couple teams like that every year, where it's like it doesn't all fit together. It doesn't make sense. Tech was one of those teams.
Yeah.
So we'll see where it goes this year.
Giving up 48 points to last year's Oklahoma State team in a winning effort is unacceptable. Giving up 60 to Baylor in a losing effort, it's unacceptable. And that seemed to be the tact, the minute the season ended, they're like, all right, what are we doing to never go through that specific? And Texas Tech, unfortunately, has like a fraught defensive recent history. But it's never been a better time to quickly fix that right now. I want to go to, who's next? I want to go to USC.
Oh.
Because I guess there is Quentin Joyner connective tissue.
Okay.
Is that who went to Texas Tech from USC? USC's issue to me is a little bit more vague. It's finishing games or being prepared to finish games, especially on the road. So I don't know if it's a body clock thing. I don't know if it's a preparedness thing. I don't know if it's a fitness thing at the end of games. USC's offseason, their 2025 recruiting class, the way that they've decided to approach or not approach changes needed, that they stepped up financially with D'Anton Lynn when he was starting to get attention, I think Penn State, where he played when their defensive coordinator job became open. Lincoln Riley talked about this, that, they're like undefeated until like the last minute of all these different games. And they were terrible on the road with losses against Minnesota and Washington, Michigan and Maryland. Minnesota, Michigan, Maryland. Yeah. They make a quarterback change. I wouldn't say going to Jade Mayava was a change in search of reliability and risk aversion, because he was still throwing the ball up. He still threw two absolutely back-breaking picks to Notre Dame in near the end of the season, I should say. But there is something about USC with they can't keep losing like this multiple years in a row. Their schedule is awesome this year.
Yeah.
Their schedule means they should be taking a step forward. I don't think their defense has actual guys this year up front. I know they're active in the portal once again. They lose some key pass catchers, and Zachariah Branch and Deuce Robinson and Kyron Hudson. These were like top 5 receivers for USC last season. But to me, it is almost just a mental thing with USC. Like, to have guys in the huddle who don't have the mindset of like, here we go again with 3.5 minutes
killer
left.
Instinct. You're talking about killer instinct.
I'm talking about total killer instinct and such confidence in their preparation that they can finish games across the country, be it in College Park or Minneapolis or something like that, or even on the West Coast in Seattle. They are in Eugene this season, I believe. But otherwise, their home road splits are pretty great. The interesting thing with USC is you look at the teams and you're just like, oh, there's not a lot of killers on this schedule. But the roster of head coaches that they play is quietly very impressive, even if the teams and the rosters and the recent results aren't. Like, it's Matt Rule and Jonathan Smith and Dan Land. Like, there's a lot of really tough coaches on this schedule that if we're talking about late game maneuverability and Lincoln Riley not having Miller Moss or Jade Mayava ready with, as you said, killer instinct at the end of games, like, can these coaches figure out ways once again with inferior rosters in some regards to eke out wins against a more talented favorite in USC. So that to me is like, it's a culture, it's a mindset thing for USC. There's still talent on both sides of the ball. Eric Gentry's back at linebacker. Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane at receiver should be great. We'll see at running back. Jade Mayava has now like a full off season as like knowing he's the guy, which is interesting to me. They made interesting changes on the offensive line. I think promising dudes from Syracuse and Purdue. But to me, once again, how do you correct it? It's killer. It's cultural. It's confidence. I guess those are all cuss sounds. And it's one of those things that starts now. Yeah. That it's so obvious what their 4-minute offense is, what their hurry up offense is with, no timeouts near the end of games, that there's just no excuse this year if they're losing in dumb ways late.
I sent you, I guess, the very early projection of.
Oh, okay. I'm seeing this now.
Of what USC's depth chart looks like on offense. Now, this is unofficial. You know how these things work. Right. It's mid-March. Does that offensive roster scare you?
It doesn't, but look at the schedule too.
The schedule is a separate thing, and I think you're right to bring that up. But just looking at this roster, does that scare you?
You can do worse than those two receivers in terms of a receiving duo. I think most of the teams, if not all of the teams we've discussed today, would love to have.
Oh, for sure.
Mekhi Lemon, Jacoby Lane. No, it doesn't seem to be like a threat for a Big Ten championship offensive too deep. No.
Not at this juncture. Things change.
Sure.
I'm curious to see if Jada Mayava with like a full off season to get prepped and having a year with some limited experience under his belt, if they're able to do some stuff. The best of him is very, very exciting as well.
Is there anybody behind him? So Hassan Longstreet is a true freshman, but 4 or 5 star, depending on where you look, I think. Sam Heward hasn't played meaningful minutes for anybody on the FBS level. Utah's quarterback situation was awful after Cam Rising last year, and Sam Heward, I don't think, had a throw last. Maybe he was hurt all last year. I don't know. But no, it is surprising that this many years into Lincoln Riley's tenure at USC, that last year the receiving room looked stacked. Obviously, having Woody Marks and Quentin Joyner was one of the great 1-2 combos in college football at running back. But it is surprising that the obvious talent level is lacking at USC under Lincoln Riley. It's weird.
It is weird. It really is. I don't know. Look, we'll see. I feel like Lincoln often talks himself into a corner.
Right.
And then gets asked a question about something and kind of gets defensive. Not to say that's happened a whole lot this offseason, but I think the only reason that stuff like that happens is because you're feeling the heat.
Sure.
Or you're feeling the pressure. And these are all competitive guys. You're at a big place like USC. They've been spending. I mean, it was a big deal to lock up Dan Lynn. They went out, they hired a GM away from Notre Dame. It seems as if many of the moves that they're making are the right ones. They're serious about this. They want to win. They're freaking USC, but I look at this roster, at least on offense. I don't know. There's not a lot here that really frightens me, but.
I wonder what the defense looks like this year too. This is not a season preview, but I think the defensive numbers last year might have been a little bit misleading given the quarterbacks faced for USC.
Yeah, agreed.
But even still, it's better to have those numbers than not and have those performances than not. It's also kind of surprising when you look at this offensive roster. You're like, Lincoln Riley couldn't get like a more established killer at quarterback, given his reputation, given Baker Mayfield, Jalen Hurts just winning a Super Bowl, Kyler Murray. Like, okay.
You would think you'd be able to trade off that. You would think you'd be able to trade off that unless he really likes Jade Mayava.
I guess so. Yeah.
Unless he really likes him.
Didn't like him enough to start him over Miller Moss last year. Yeah. Okay.
I have 2 other teams here on my list, and I think we have one of them in common for sure.
Okay.
Virginia Tech.
Yes.
I jotted down that Virginia Tech has narcolepsy, i.e. they kept falling asleep in the middle of drives.
Mm-hmm.
Virginia Tech went 3 and out 33% of the time.
Yeah.
Which is high. That's a bad number. Their passing offense was not good. Their offensive line was really bad. That probably had more to do with it than anything else. This is a team that went 6-6 regular season. They lost 6 times to power conference bowl teams. So they weren't losing the bad teams, but they just did it often,
right.
Which obviously is not something that if you're a Tech fan, you're very excited about. A lot of the underlying numbers are actually quite solid for Virginia
Yeah,
Tech.
I mean, a lot of the underlying games were absolutely winnable.
Very winnable, but there are a couple things that I think we need to diagnose here, not the least of which is the third down thing or going 3 and out thing or the offensive line thing or the fact that Kyron Jones was banged up and they were playing some musical chairs at quarterback. They've got a new offensive coordinator this year, Phil Montgomery, stepping in. Whether or not that is able to give them the change that they need remains to be seen, but they just need to be more consistent.
Right.
They need to be more consistent, especially through the air, and they need to try and keep their quarterback hurt or from getting hurt.
Yeah, that was a weird direction you went with that, but yeah.
Speaking of odd construction, Stan.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Ty. You look at what Virginia Tech's season involved last year, and it was, they lost another winnable moment.
Yeah.
Virginia, whether it was against, obviously the headliner was the ending of that Miami game. But this team wasn't far off. And as you mentioned, the underlying numbers indicate that. It was quarterback health. It was explosive passing, which obviously goes hand in hand with quarterback health. And what does this team look like and how prepared are they at the end of games? What does their no timeouts offense look like? Are guys aware to get out of bounds or get down and get lined up for a spike? What does it look like? I don't know what they could have done against Miami. That was just referee judgment. But they were forcing turnovers. They were obviously running the ball quite well against Miami, like a lot of teams did. What does it look like killer instinct-wise, up 3, down 4, whatever, with 2.5 minutes left against Syracuse, against Clemson, all these teams that, there were moments where it's like, oh, Virginia Tech might have a shot here, or looks like they're going to win this game. And you're right. It does come down to the ability to deliver late.
I am really curious to see what this Virginia Tech team looks like this year because they weren't that far off. They were frustrating, I have to believe, if you were a Virginia Tech fan.
Yeah.
And it feels to me, looking at this schedule, like this is gettable. This is a very, very workable schedule. They open up the year, neutral siter against South Carolina. That'll be a tough game.
Yeah.
But outside of that, you got Vanderbilt, you got Old Dominion, you got Wofford, you got NC State, you got Wake Forest. Georgia Tech, I guess, on the road could be a plucky game. Really, you got to go all the way into November before you start getting to what I think will be the real meat of the schedule.
Sure.
It's a very, very backloaded schedule. Louisville, before a bye week. That game, by the way, is in Blacksburg. They're at Florida State. They're home against Miami. They close out the year Commonwealth Cup on the road at Virginia, a game they should win. There's a lot of wins on this schedule. So if they can just do a little bit of cleanup with that offense, and again, just get marginally better under Phil Montgomery,
right?
I think there's a lot of upside here if you're a Tech fan.
Yeah, but we kind of say that every year.
Well, we do, and I guess the bigger point about Tech then is if you're not going to have like a 9-3 season this year against the schedule, which seems like it could be doable to me.
Right.
Even 8-4.
Right.
How long did they give Brent Pry?
It's a good question. Look, they know what needs addressing. They brought over, I think, exclusively West Virginia offensive linemen.
That's right.
So that can go a long way. Obviously, you start, up front in a better position, depending on what you think of these West Virginia offensive linemen, then they'll be good, right? That can take, keep a quarterback healthier, then a quarterback's going to be better. They allowed way too much pressure on him, which plays a role in third downs, which plays a role in closing games out, deeper, better offensive line. Not breaking news is helpful. So I appreciate that they have looked at this roster. They've looked at the results of what they were on the offensive line last year, whether it was players playing healthy, players not playing beat up, that you're like, we need more. We absolutely need more if we want to win 8-9 games.
And they got to be more consistent. You can't go 3 and out a third of the time.
No.
You just can't do that.
But that's
You're not
pressure,
gonna win. Yeah.
right? That's dealing with. I'm not saying pressure as in like the what Brent Pry feels every week, like what Kyron Jones feels every week on 3rd and 4, 3rd and 11, whatever. That they have to deal with the best of what the ACC is throwing at them up front.
It's one final point on this, and then I'm going to move on. I have one other team here in the ACC I want to talk about briefly, but like their previous coordinator, I believe, was Tyler Bowen,
right? Who left an hour and a half ago to go to Ohio State. Yeah,
and he's got a pedigree working with offensive linemen.
Mm-hmm.
This is a really bad offensive line.
Yep.
So that side of it didn't really work.
No,
didn't really work, to say the least.
No. Where else did you want to go in the ACC? I think I only have one team left.
I have Wake Forest, actually.
Oh, okay.
Wake Forest. We didn't talk a whole lot of Wake last year, but Wake Forest on both lines, in particular, was among the worst teams in the nation. On defense, it was bad, and it was still not the worst part of the defense. That defense was a train wreck. The class of 2025 high school recruiting, I went through and looked. It only featured about 3 or 4 offensive linemen. So Jake Dickert comes in, the new coach from Wazoo. He paid attention to the lines, I think, significantly via the portal. Wake Forest took in 22 transfers. They were tied for the 7th most in FBS. It was clear upon him taking that job that he knew he needed to go out and try and beef up the lines.
Right.
So especially in the offensive side of the ball, he did do that to some extent. It's going to be a longer term build. It's going to be a work in progress. If you're able to, I think, build a little bit more consistency along those lines, it makes Wake Forest a hell of a lot better in the ACC, which again is still a gettable conference.
Mm-hmm.
Very gettable. There's no reason that Wake Forest should have been where they were. Wake Forest is one of those teams that's been hampered, I know, by the transfer portal, i.e. other teams taking their players the last couple of years. But this is an opportunity to refresh now under Jake Dickert and see if he can build, a better version of what he had up at Wazoo. Weird fit to me, going cross country to take the Wake job.
Right.
But I like Jake Dickert. I'm curious to see what he's got in store here, but they need to fix those lines. The lines were real bad last year.
Yeah. I didn't look at any new coach teams because obviously this is not Jake Dickert wasn't a coach who went through everything with Wake Forest last year and has a concept. But I also appreciate you throwing in that wrinkle because we haven't done any new coach teams of like, okay, here is the glaring thing right now that if it's not able to be not solved, but approached in any sort of meaningful way in year one, that's kind of a problem if something is that obvious.
Yeah.
My final team is Air Force. Air Force has been kind of like a study in consistency, that winning 9, 10, 11 games the last few years. I think they went 3-3 during the COVID year, but otherwise, they've won a ton of games in the Mountain West with a very specific formula of like a fast, angry defense up front and ball control. And you need both of those things to win the number of games that Air Force has won. Because if you stop possessing the ball and you start, I think it was John Boucher was the starting quarterback for a chunk of last season when, look, they're not throwing the ball. But when you do throw the ball, you can't throw picks, right? If you're going to never throw the ball and really pick your spots, if you pick your spot and it goes awry and goes to the other team, that makes it impossible. If the whole formula is possess and suffocate. And so that, to me, is where Air Force, they made the change to Quentin Hayes at quarterback near the end of last season. They finished the season winning 4 straight. It appears that will jumpstart and continue to jumpstart things for Air Force. But to me, it is really the defense that is the calling card for recent Air Force success. And they had to replace a ton of guys last year. And now I know they lose a couple of key guys to the portal, especially off the edge. But they were so young last year. I can't diagnose just experience, but really it's just getting off the field in big moments for Air Force.
Yeah,
and that's the you see at the bottom of the page, the spammy, like, this one simple trick will get rid of belly fat. The one simple trick for Air Force is trusting their very experienced coaching staff to make great third down calls, because if they get off the field on defense And they even improved their ability to possess just a little bit on offense to stay on the field. It's sort of that get off, stay on complementary dynamic for Air Force. They go from, a 5-6 type win team to immediately 10 with how much of a pain in the ass they can be when they're playing to their capability.
This was a top 30 defense in 2023. It fell to 79th.
And it was not even top 30. It was like top dozen in the country for like a large swath of that year.
Oh,
and it faded a little bit.
Go back to 2020, they were a top 10 unit. Go back to 2022, they were 12th in the country. This is, to your point, they've been very, very good on defense. They weren't last year. They were really bad on offense last year.
Yes.
They really took a step back, and there are reasons for that we don't have to get into. I mean, there were injuries. They had some issues that they were dealing with. But there was a big chunk of this season where they lost 7 games. 7 games consecutively, starting in week 2, running all the way through week 10 against Army on the road.
Right.
Before they won those 4 straight to close out the season. What's, I think, really striking, if you look at that 7-game losing streak right in the middle of the season, look at things like post-game win expectancy, which gives you some tell as to whether or not was the game close. Could they have won? Were they playing better than their opponent, but they got an unlucky break? I'm looking at 3%, 1%. There's a 9% and a 10% in here, and there are a bunch of zeros. They weren't even close in some of these games that they lost. So hopefully this is a scenario in which it clicked for them.
Right.
And, moving into this new season, things are going to take on a little bit of a different shape, but definitely a rough go for the majority of the Air Force season last year.
And not, we talk about this with a lot of these heavy rushing teams that not always built to come back when they're down 17-3 or 14-0 pretty quickly. And it was 2 short field touchdowns against Colorado State. By the way, the Rams were on the verge of the Mountain West Championship game. And just, it's too hard to come back with an undisciplined offense when, and it wasn't, obviously the defense's fault. I think it was a short field punt that set up the first touchdown and then a fumble and another short field touchdown for Colorado State. And they did everything they could late to scrap and fight at the end of that game. And the thing with Air Force too is they have to rely on experience because there aren't transfers coming up to the Air Force Academy for the Falcons. And so that's one of those things too, where there may be lump years occasionally, but all things considered, Troy Calhoun has done a great job building up depth consistently, keeping the roster where he wants it to be, that they can continuously threaten double-digit wins most seasons. And so they're like a big benefit of the doubt team to me right now, even in this like very different era, that there's been so much consistency there that it's just little tweaks for Air Force. Hopefully, with Quentin Hayes looking a little bit more promising than where they were at quarterback last season for a large swath.
All right, why don't we leave it there? If you listen to this whole episode, an hour or so of us diagnosing very specific maladies with some of these teams, hit us up, solidverbal@gmail.com. Let us know where we're right and wrong, what your thoughts are. If you're a fan of one of these teams, did it get fixed? Did it not get fixed? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? You know the drill. Reach out via email, social media. We read all of those comments. Of course, leave a comment, hit follow, hit subscribe wherever you can. We appreciate having you with us here in the Verballerhood. We are recording this, as we said, on Monday, which is St. Patrick's Day.
Yes.
The NCAA tournament starts on Thursday.
Are either of your teams in it? Notre Dame, Penn State? Are they making appearances this year?
No.
I don't even know. I know Penn State's not that good. I didn't know about Notre Dame.
Oregon's in. I was going to say Penn State's
Oregon's
terrible.
in as a 5. I know that.
Penn State's terrible. Oregon's a 5. Alas, we are going to have a basketball pool. I started it up this morning. We've already got some people who found it and have been signing up. But if you go on out to our Patreon at verballers.com, free game, open everybody. I'll post the link. Just go sign up at verballers.com. Free member, paid member, whatever you're into. We'll give away a couple shirts if you're cool with that to whoever wins the pick'em pool, the bracket pool that we've got going on. I guess starting on Thursday. So
I'm looking to see which teams in PA are in. It looks like St. Francis is playing in a play-in.
St. Francis is playing in a play-in game.
Any other Pennsylvania? Any of like those Philly schools?
I don't believe so.
Drexel? Any of those?
I don't believe so.
Temple, is Temple in the tournament?
I don't think so.
Oh, man. PA, not showing.
No, the great's not in basketball this year.
Oh, man. I'm looking all over the place. Maybe I'm missing something with PA. Oregon has Liberty in the first round and could play Arizona, an old Pac-10-12 running mate, in the second round. And they're in like the Duke quadrant. I don't know a ton about Oregon basketball right now, but
you will by Thursday. You will by Thursday.
That's true.
You have time.
True.
You have time to check
Can't
it out.
wait.
So get in verballers.com. Again, it's free to play, free game. Just go and sign up there. And I'll post the link out shortly. The only other thing I have for you, I do need more details at some point. Maybe we can talk about this on the Thursday bonus episode.
Okay.
About the leprechaun trap.
I've only learned about this in the last 24 hours.
I'm going to need more from you. I'm going to give you some time to stew over this. We can talk about it on Thursday.
I was told by Jody with an eye, like, hey, go to Walgreens and see if they have any little leprechauns to put in the trap, because that's a big deal thing. I was like, oh, okay. I'll try.
I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, that's a thing here, I guess. I had no idea.
I would like to know from people, if you've built a leprechaun trap, to what ends have you gone to make it a high fidelity leprechaun trap? Like one that might actually work if leprechauns were real.
I was told my 4-year-old was terrified during the leprechaun trap reveal at a friend's house yesterday.
Okay.
Like hiding behind grown-ups. So I guess it's a thing.
Great. Why don't we leave it there? On that note, if you listened again, hit follow, hit subscribe, reach out, let us know your thoughts.
Yes.
For that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildenbrandt, we will talk to you all on Thursday. Stay solid.
Peace.